And welcome to another offseason edition of Believe in Chargers. Big thank you to Daniel Popper with me. Turns out Matt Money Smith, not all that sought after when it comes to making the rounds on Radio Row. Lorenzo Neal, supplements, clothing, you name it. Lowe is as good a guest as you're going to get up there on Super Bowl week. So we appreciate it, Pop. You can subscribe to The Athletic. I have since its inception. Cannot recommend that enough. And you can follow him through his Substack, Hops with Pop. Just one of the best damn beat writers anywhere for any sport. Certainly appreciate you joining us, Pop. How are you, man?
Appreciate it, Money. Thanks for having me on. Doing great. Ready to talk some ball.
Yeah, so I guess we'll start with the past before we kind of look to the future. Free agency is upon us. I'll be at the Combine in about 2.5 weeks. I know you'll be there as well. But let's kind of get to what happened on Tuesday. And it was the, second in as many weeks introductory press conference for a new coordinator. This time, Chris O'Leary, a little bit less fanfare than Mike McDaniel had, understandably. But sort of I'll let you take the floor, your initial takeaways from the presser, from the hire, and kind of where you think this thing is headed.
Yeah, so my biggest takeaway was that he sort of corroborated a bunch of things that I had sort of pieced together after the hire went down the previous week. Got my hands on some Western Michigan film, obviously where he coordinated last season, and I'm getting through, that game against North Texas. I get in the second quarter, I see a 3rd and 16. They got 3 high safeties. They rotate into cover 3, and I'm like, wait a second, I've seen this before. Talked to some people and realized that, okay, he was running Jesse Minter's scheme at Western Michigan. And then you start to dig into it a little bit more as far as his past, when they first met. Chris O'Leary was a player at Indiana State when Jesse Minter was a coach there. Rick Minter was a coach there, Jesse's father as well. Jesse Minter gave Chris O'Leary his first coaching job at Georgia State. They reunited with the Chargers in 2024. So it started to crystallize, as Chris talked about it, how much of a disciple he is of Jesse Minter, how much he believes in the scheme and the system and the defense. But he even took it a step further in the press conference, where he said something interesting about taking the separators from the Chargers to Western Michigan, things like ball disruption, communication, effort and angles, all of these fundamentals that Jesse Minter teaches and how he teaches them, right? He assigns one of them to each position coach. They present to the entire defense every week. So not only did he take the X's and O's with him to Western Michigan, he also took the approach to fundamentals from Jesse Minter. And I think ultimately, you went into the search trying to figure out, okay, how could they best maintain scheme continuity? How could they build on what Jesse Minter established? I never felt like they wanted to stray too far from that, because the players really believe in the system and the scheme. And I think they were looking for the person that could be the guy that could come in and build on and continue what Jesse Minter had established with the Chargers. And I think that brought them to Chris O'Leary. And that was my biggest takeaway from the press conference, was really corroborating a lot of the things that I pieced together from looking into his history, from watching the film. He kind of established that and called Jesse Minter, a mentor throughout his coaching career. And that was obviously a feather in his cap as he went through the interview process with the Chargers.
Yeah, I think so many of us were trying to figure out, would it be Coach Clinkscale? Would it be Coach Elston? Who would ascend? And turns out it's the guy that, had the balls or the gall to go to Kalamazoo, and be like, I gotta call defense. I gotta be a coordinator. And, he was willing to do that. And like you said, talk about a turnaround. My radio partner, Petros, did the Michigan State Western Michigan game, and Michigan State kind of had their way with them, but he came back and he was like, man, that defense, that Western, because it was a rough start, then it kind of settled in, and he was talking about their edge, who I think had a bunch of pressures in that game.
Dame Tucker.
Oh yeah, right, yeah, exactly, Tucker. So and I was like, oh yeah, that's O'Leary, that's our safeties coach that everybody loved while he was here, and so you get that experience calling plays. You show a turnaround from a defense that was ranked in the hundreds, gets all the way to the 10. And kind of, I said this before, it's not like it's the Big Ten or the SEC and you've got this big pile of money and you identify players and you staff your defense and you end up getting an edge on the rest of the conference. It's the MAC, man. You are fighting on essentially an even playing field at Western, and even you could say maybe a little bit of a step down from the Toledos and the Akrons that have kind of been at the top of the MAC year in and year out. And yet here's a guy that helps win the conference, that turns a defense from somewhere in the hundreds to the top 10 in a bunch of categories. And I think to kind of build on what you talked about, Pop, sometimes guys, they're not comfortable enough in their own skin to say, yeah, I'm just doing what Jesse did, man. And I talked to him once a week and I would watch his film and I would see what I can apply. And I think that says a lot about who he is as a person, that he did say, yes, I am a Jesse Minter disciple. He is as important to me in my career as any individual, and I am trying to emulate basically what he does, and it works. And he also added that I think there's things I can tweak that can maybe make it better. But I think the fact he didn't run from that is a huge feather in his cap to these players, because they know what it looks like and they know what it's going to look like and they know the separators. So it is, to me, important to be yourself, but to also acknowledge sort of like where you came from and how you got to this spot.
Yeah, and I think it's also sort of organizational alignment, right? Like I think him going up and saying that shows that they wanted somebody that believed in this system, that knew this system in and out, that had proven they could run this system as a play caller. And honestly, I think that was the right approach from the organization. Like this defense has been so good for 2 years, and you don't want the players to start over, right? You want them to come in and feel like you're picking up where you left off. And I think ultimately that's what led them to Chris O'Leary. Looking back on it, I'm kicking myself a little bit for not, having my finger on the pulse a little bit more in terms of his possibility of becoming the DC. When he left, and he mentioned this in the press conference, I had heard there was some family stuff involved in his decision to go to Kalamazoo and to leave and take, what was ostensibly a step back. And so I assumed, okay, a year out, is he really going to make the jump back to the NFL and back to the Chargers? In hindsight, I should have thrown the name out there because he was so impressive as a position coach. That's the one thing is like when you talk about, all of these position coaches that have obviously done a very, very good job, what he did in 24 was really impressive. And I got a chance to talk to him when we were in Charlotte in between week 2 and week 3 about Elijah and, onboarding him. And, he taught Elijah the entire scheme over 3 meetings, 2.5-hour meetings over 3 days. And, Elijah had an interception, in week 2, like 10 days after he was traded to the Chargers. But then you also talk about the work with Derwin James too, and how instrumental he was in establishing that role, teaching that role to Derwin James, every day at the start of practice, working one-on-one with Derwin. And something he said in the press conference that I loved was clarity equals velocity. Like that to me, like the interpersonal skills, the relationship building, the understanding of who Derwin is, like that shines through in just those 3 simple words. Cause that's all Derwin talks about. Make it simple for me so I can play fast. And so, I think like the job he did as a position coach, he probably should have been on my radar a little bit more, but
Yeah. And I think, with Derwin, we all know, just from from a tone setting standpoint, the force multiplier that he is. So if there was any question of, you've got Mike Elston, who's got a little salt and pepper hair. You've got Klink that's in his mid 40s and is probably waiting for his opportunity. That if there was any pushback to a guy that's only been in the NFL for a single year, that coordinated a defense for a single season at Western Michigan, of all places, that Derwin's going to make sure that that's not an issue. That this is someone, like you said, when you think about sort of the mental wilderness, the mental football wilderness that Derwin was in under Brandon Staley, to be able to bounce back in 24 and last year and play to the level and to the ability that we all know is there, is arguably one of the best defensive players in the league. I mean, to me, that's as important, if not probably the most important player, on the defense. And even you could argue on the team, just because of the tone that he sets to make sure he's in your corner.
Yeah, and you talk about systems and schemes, right? There's X's and O's, there's installs, there's stuff that crosses over from team to team. But there's also unique attributes to a specific defense. And with the Chargers, like Derwin being Derwin is the unique attribute of this defense that really allowed it to become what it became. And so now you have the guy that was instrumental in sort of creating that unique role for Derwin. And obviously you've seen it in other places around the league, right? They've modeled it after Kyle Hamilton. You've seen Nick Emmanwori in Seattle with Mike McDaniel. But every player is different. You have similar archetypes, but to have the guy who really, created the role that made this defense into what it is, that created the identity, I think is really important. I'd love to get your thoughts on this. Like, I do think it's a little bit of a gamble. I think inherently it's a little bit of a gamble, right? I think it's a logical gamble. I think it was the right gamble to take. However, you have one season of play calling experience, and as well as he did at Western Michigan, calling plays in the NFL is very, very different than calling plays in the MAC. And I like it. I like it. on my podcast, people were asking for a grade because everyone wants a freaking grade. B plus, A minus. Like, I like it. I think it made sense. It stuck with sort of my philosophy, which was try and find some scheme continuity. But there's going to be a little bit of an unknown. I think part of the calculus, and I'm sure we'll get into this, is like, okay, if it takes a little bit of time for him to sort of find his mojo as a play caller on defense, what you've brought in on the other side on offense is Mike McDaniel, who is a professional forward thinker, cutting edge, and you feel like he's going to be able to elevate that side. So it's a little bit of a give and take on the scales on each side of the ball, in my opinion.
Yeah, to me, the grade is, and I think for the most part, it feels like it's kind of managed to shake out. I'm sure we could see a little bit more movement, but now all head coaches have been hired, coordinators have been hired. To me, it's such a good staff that I think they're trying to seek, or they were trying to find someone that can keep this staff together. And I get it. I'm sure Jesse might pluck one or two, but like, if I'm Dylan Roney, if I'm Mike Elston, if I'm Klingscale, like, I know Harbaugh's safe, man. I know Harbaugh's going to be a head coach for the Chargers, or if it's not here, he's going to be a head coach somewhere else. And I've been with him at Michigan, and I know my job, as long as I keep doing it, is safe. And as much faith as I have that Jesse's going to be an incredible head coach and do a great job, you still don't know. And the guy's following, John Harbaugh, who won a Super Bowl, was there for 18 years. So, and I'm sure there's other staffs that could pluck and maybe promote and make them feel better about it if they feel like maybe they were passed over. But to me, if you can keep the position coaches there, you talk about the separators, each of them are going to continue to preach the separator that they were responsible for, that, that's as big of a part. And it's also, if Khalil comes back, and I still think he either comes back or it's retirement, if Derwin is there, like, you've got these players that can just kind of hold it, like you said, while maybe these first, like he talked about his first game, Michigan State scores touchdowns on 3 of the first 4, and you realize, oh yeah, it's not about this. It's not about this call sheet. It's not about plays. It's about players. And I thought that was, very, like you said, there were moments where you're like, okay, this guy gets it. And to me, that was one, to acknowledge that, to quickly realize you're not going to have the right call every time, but if you have the right foundation and the right fundamentals to your defense, you could overcome not having the right calls. To me, it was what you said right at the top, Pop, which is, let's keep it, to take something from Sammy Sosa when he talked about, what do you got to do the rest of the way to make the playoffs? We got to keep it continue, to keep it continue,
exactly.
to make sure, that it's not necessarily bringing somebody else that had Jim Schwartz or Jim Leonard or, Wink Mark. I mean, I guess Wink would have made some sense, but
yeah,
like, that part of it made sense to me.
Aubrey Pleasant was another guy that would have been a little bit of a deviation. I'm with you. I think it makes sense. And you sort of mentioned his he talked about sort of learning how important the foundation is, building the fundamentals so that you have a certain play style and you can't just turn that switch on, in the middle of a game or the middle of the season. I mean, I went back and read some of the quotes from my conversation with Jesse Minter over the summer, and the way that he talked about sort of coming to the separators, figuring that out after 22 at Michigan when they gave up all those points to TCU in the college football playoff. I mean, it sounds very similar. Jesse Minter is saying, it's about, understanding exactly what we're demanding from the players, which is a very, very similar thing to Chris O'Leary and what he said in his press conference. So I think you're talking about a guy that is positioned to really maintain the culture, maintain the scheme, the X's and O's, the continuity that you're looking for. And in that way, it makes a ton of sense for the Chargers.
Yeah. And look, our friends at FanDuel, and we thank them for letting us do this pod week in and week out. They're believers. The latest Super Bowl 61 odds are out at FanDuel, and they've got the Chargers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th plus 1,500 favorites in the AFC West. The only AFC teams ahead of them are the Bills at plus 1,200, the Ravens at plus 1,200 right now. So that's kind of where it sits at this very
Jesse
moment.
Minter bump, huh?
Right, the Jesse Minter bump, maybe a little healthy season from Lamar Jackson's. But yeah, it's I think the other thing you acknowledged is, if this is, and I know that it's mirrored, so if this was the defense last year and this was the offense, I'll try to get it all on camera here. If it's here, I think the Chargers are in a much better place. If we can get that offense to go from here to here, especially when you look at the idea that it's Justin Herbert and Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater is back out there and Ladd McConkey doing what Ladd McConkey's supposed to do, it just feels like that offense can really raise to a level that will compensate for whatever step back the Jesse Minter effect might have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Ladd is going to be so good in this offense.
Yeah.
You watch the Miami tape over McDaniel's time there, and there's so many different route combinations, pre-snap stuff where you're like, hey,
Ladd.
Number 15 would look pretty good doing exactly that. And they tried to, I talked about this a little bit on my pod. Like they tried to sprinkle some of that stuff in, getting him moving before the snap, trying to get him some advantage against some man looks. And, you know, there were moments where he was open as a result, but there's a difference between sprinkling it on top as a garnish and having it be the entree, right? Like having it be like the actual fabric of the offense. And really making it who you are as opposed to it being a wrinkle, you know, and I think that'll be the big difference. But I'm with you 100%. You know, you expect a bump offensively as long as they can stay healthy, right? And that's obviously a big caveat. But, you know, just finding layups for the quarterback, making things easier on everybody and not having every explosive play feel like pulling teeth and such a process to get there. I think that's going to change how they play. It's going to make them more explosive. And I think we're going to see a really, really good version of Justin Herbert in this offense.
Yeah, and I think, you know, just because it's you know, we haven't had a chance to talk with you about it, but certainly the hire of Mike McDaniel, considerably more attention and excitement than the hiring of Chris O'Leary. But like to me, and I don't know if Coach Harbaugh had predetermined that they were probably going to have to move on from Coach Roman until after the Patriot game. But to me, like what you saw from Justin mentally in that Patriot game was just is as big of a flag as any I've seen. The fact that it just clearly he's in the shotgun, he's still dropping 5 steps and trying to get a play to develop. You know, it just was constant. You know, it felt like there was a seed planted in his head. All right, I'm going to take this snap and I'm going to drop 7 steps and there's going to be someone ready to put their freaking helmet in my chest again, but I'm going to do it. And I mentioned that because to your point, it's one thing to have it be a play. It's another thing for it to be the offense. Like, hey, here's a play of Ladd. You know, no, this is what Ladd does. This is who he is in this offense. This is part of it. And to me, that was obviously something that Mike McDaniel pointed out. He's like, yeah, we got to come up with an offense where all 3 quarterbacks should have a series of plays that they're incredibly comfortable running and feel incredibly excited about being successful. And I just don't know if there were any of those this past year.
Right. Like, can the play caller provide an advantage by himself? That's what I think McDaniel is going to bring. And that's what I felt like was missing. And really, like, there were positive moments from Greg Roman over 2 years, but when it got to these big games in the playoffs, when teams are tailoring their game plans to try and take away exactly what you do, are you at a high enough level schematically to be able to overcome that and still give your quarterback an advantage? And that's really what's going to matter in the playoffs. I mean, you see, you know, other teams in these playoffs that are able to give their quarterback chances to make plays even when they're not at their absolute best. I mean, there's been moments where Drake May hasn't been at his absolute best and the Patriots are in the Super Bowl, you know? So if Justin Herbert isn't in superhero mode, which happens infrequently, but does happen and has happened in the last 2 playoffs, do you have a play caller and a schemer that's still going to give him answers in those moments to, I think, get him back on track, right? I think like in these last 2 playoff games, Houston, and obviously, you know, this past year, like
New England,
against New England, like they needed a play where he could just get rid of the ball quickly and produce 15 to 20 yards and create an explosive from the scheme and the X's and O's itself. And that just wasn't available to him. And as a result, it snowballed. So that's what McDaniel's going to bring in those moments where he's not at his best. You can get him back on track with a layup, right?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of how much I can say here, but like, you know, I had heard that like the idea was, they think we're going to come out and run it. No, watch this. We're gonna take advantage of some explosives in the passing game. And to me, you get that early interception and you're still in that script mode of, we're going to take advantage of them. And the Pats like, dude, you have got a 1st and 10 from the 10-yard line. Let's try to make this easy. Let's not drop Herbert back, have him under duress. And now he's scrambling already on the first play, trying not to lose yardage. And it just felt like the whole thing got derailed from there. And to your point, that's it. You could not have put it any more perfectly for the people that you needed that play to just lock him back in, and it never showed up. And I think that first turnover on downs after an interception was so reminiscent. And I'm not saying Justin can't get past mental scar tissue, but it was so reminiscent of the Houston game when you have these 2 early turnovers and these 2 opportunities to put this game away with the way that your defense is playing, and they came up short. And I find it almost impossible to believe that just didn't plant a seed there. And, schematically, they weren't able to remove it and get him past that.
Yeah. It was clearly overthinking to me,
Yeah.
like I felt like heading into that game, they were gonna be able to run the ball. Everyone in that locker room felt like they were going to be able to run the ball. They thought they were going to be able to run the ball. They thought they were going to run the ball. And then you get 1st and 10 from the 10-yard line. You don't hand the ball off to the running back, and everyone's looking around like, who are we? Right? Like, that's the thing, is you bring Graham Roman in because he's going to run the damn ball.
Yeah.
Right. And in a game where it absolutely called for it, they got away from who they're supposed to be. And now you have a bunch of players there that feel like, what is our identity? Right. I thought this was an O-line centric building. I thought if we felt like we had an advantage on the ground, we were going to impose our will. How often did the coaching staff talk about that? And when they had an opportunity to do it, they completely went away from it. And that, to me, was the story of that New England game, 100%.
All right, let's shift to the future here, Pop, because we got free agency upon us. I've got the list of all the Chargers free agents in front of me, offense, defense, separated positionally. Got a few external free agents that we've kind of heard about, mostly just kind of focused on the lines. But, when I kind of start going through it, the names that jump out to me most, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, if you include the restricted free agent Indeculus, 6 offensive linemen from this team, Zion being the big ticket. And then, Trevor, whose contract is expiring, Jamari, whose rookie deal is up. And then you've got the trade for Trevor Penning, Andre James, Bobby Hart, and you traded for Austin Deculus. When I mention those 6 names, how many of them do you think are back?
That's a good question.
Or if you want, just kind of attack it from a name standpoint of, this is where I think priority 1. This seems
real.
And I mean, I can kick it off if you want. Totally up
to
you.
No. It's a good question. I would probably throw Mekhi Becton into that as well, just based on what his cap hit is, $12.2 million, and how he played and how much he played last year. I just
think he's gone. I assume he's gone.
Yeah.
My opinion.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you're talking about a need to upgrade center, which we've talked about that at length on numerous pods.
I do have Tyler Linderbaum here. PFF has him listed at a $70 million contract.
Yep. So in theory, if you move on from Becton, Zion Johnson as a free agent, and you feel like you need an upgrade at center, that's a lot to do in one off season, which it's looking like they're going to have to. So, I would start with Zion.
So do you think it's a number thing with him?
Yeah. I mean, the guard market has gone crazy. That is very good news for Zion Johnson and his camp, right? Like, you look at what Aaron Banks signed for last year with Green Bay.
Freaking Aaron Banks ruined it for everybody.
Yeah, but that's how it works. That's how the NFL works, right? Like, you look at that contract. Like, if I was Zion's agent, I would look at that contract and be like, my guy's way better than this guy.
And he is.
And this guy got $19.25 million, right? Like, so that's getting pricey for Zion Johnson. I thought he played a lot better after the bye week. I thought week 13 to week 18 was the best stretch of football he's played in his career. He kind of took a step back in that New England game. I thought he looked a lot more like the old Zion than the quote unquote new Zion. But it feels to me like the off season has to start with on offense has to start with him. Like, what are you going to do there? How high are you willing to go? And what is your plan if his market goes a little bit crazy and he, has an opportunity to sign for 20 plus million somewhere else? Are you going to sign him at that number, or are you going to look elsewhere? I think this goes back to last offseason when it felt like they needed help on the interior and they didn't really invest significantly in the draft. And so they don't really have, a guy on the roster who can really step in and in theory replace Zion Johnson.
Right.
So I think they have to re-sign Zion. Everything sort of fits into the puzzle a little bit easier when if you re-sign Zion Johnson, because now you have left guard set and you're really focused on, right guard and center. If he ends up walking elsewhere, that makes it a little bit difficult. All the other guys that you mentioned, it's we'll see, right? Like I like Trey Pipkins as a swing tackle. Will he have an opportunity to start elsewhere? That's possible. When he's healthy, I think he's a functional starting tackle in the league. Problem is he's battled injuries. Jamari, I think, is going to want a chance to start at left tackle. I think he's gonna put his tape out there and be like, look at what I've been able to do when I get a chance to start at my natural position. And if there's a team out there that isn't in a rush to compete, isn't early stages of the build, and you can go get Jamari Salyer at a reasonable price and plug him in at left tackle and see if maybe you can get some bang for your buck and potentially get a starter at left tackle there. Obviously, he doesn't have that pathway with the Chargers, assuming, Rashawn and Joe Alt both come back. Trevor Penning is interesting.
That's the one I find interesting.
I like him at guard better than tackle. I think
completely.
I think at this point, he's not an NFL tackle. I think that was made pretty clear this past year. And then obviously the Saints had moved him to guard before the trade to the Chargers. So is he an option at right guard? I think so. I think you could bring him back with some competition. That's probably how I'd look at it. Like if he performs well, and exactly. Could be a free agent too. Really, draft pick probably makes more sense because it's lower cost financially. But I wouldn't be like upset if they brought him back and we're like, yeah, he's going to be in the mix to maybe start at right guard if and when they move on from Mekhi Becton. So that's kind of how I view it. I think the other guys, you can make a case for it. You can make a case against it. The big one for me, though, is Zion and what they do there if his market explodes, because that becomes a little bit of a conundrum.
Yeah, I think with like Trevor, I just like the way he looked in that sixth offensive lineman package. I think he's got even though he's a big body, he's still athletic enough, I think, to work with what Mike McDaniel wants to do and with what Jim Harbaugh wants to do, is you kind of merge those two things. Like, to me, he's just he fits, but like I say, he's not a tackle. We saw that was not the case. But I think especially if he's next to, Joe Alt instead of, 60% Trey Pipkins, I think you're a lot better off, with him. You got two big freaking guys next to each other that can move. And so that part of it's interesting to me. I guess the thing with Zion for me is, if you're telling me that I'm going to sign Zion, and I like Zion, I think the one thing he is dependable. The guy plays every snap, and that's got to count for something, considering what
especially this past year counted for something, right?
Yeah. Exactly. So like there is high, but if you tell me that, hey, the number for Zion is going to be the same for Linderbaum, and you either re-sign Zion and you dip into the center market and it's not Linderbaum, it's more, Connor McGovern, or it's going to be a draft pick or something like that.
Cade Mays is another guy to throw out there at center.
Yeah, exactly. So, and like that's the combo versus, hey, it's Linderbaum, and instead of Zion, you're going out and getting sort of the next, Bitonio, Wyatt Teller sort of level guard, and that's how you plug it. Like that's what I think it ultimately comes down to. Not to mention the comp pick formula. If Zion's going to go out there and someone's going to give him $20 million a year, I almost wonder if that comes into play as well, just because it's a lot of money. Like that is a lot of money when you're already committed to Slater. Alt is going to become the highest paid offensive lineman in the league when he's up. And like, that's where I'm trying to figure out how that pie fits together on that position group.
100%. However, I will say this. They got to win. Like, it's year 3, and I understand there were injuries last year, but there's a reason they made changes to the offensive coaching staff after back-to-back 11-win seasons. Like, they have to win in the playoffs, and I wonder how that impacts the strategy. This offseason. Obviously, you want to be frugal, you want to be pragmatic, calculated, all of these words that Joe Ortiz has used. But at a certain point, there's a weakness with the team that we've seen along the offensive line, even with
Yeah.
these great tackles, obviously with injuries last year. But the interior has not been good enough over 2 years. So at a certain point, like there comes a time where you have to spend your cap space and be a little bit more aggressive to figure out what has been a glaring weakness. Is this the offseason where they do that? One thing that was interesting at the end of season press conference that Joe Ortiz said, he went through the typical, we're going to be calculated, et cetera. But he also said, you have to believe in the player. And if you believe in the player, then we can get to a place where maybe we'll spend some of this cap space. And that set my, alarm off.
Yeah.
Like that's a little different than how he's framed it over the first 2 years of the regime. And Tyler Linderbaum is a guy that Joe Ortiz was a part of drafting in Baltimore, right? So, if you believe in the player, you can pay him. They clearly believe in Zion. Obviously, I think the end of the season was enough for me to say, okay, I'm willing to pay him. Is it $20 million? But how does the pressure and the expectations of the organization impact how aggressive they are in figuring this out, especially after what happened to Justin Herbert last season, the number of hits he took?
Yeah, untenable. Now, there's also the flip side of that is this offensive scheme more friendly? And when you've got Aaron Brewer, when you've got players like and you look at that Miami offensive line, I mean, it was not impressive, and yet there they are, putting up yards and putting up points and making it work and sending guys to the Pro Bowl and potentially all pros, with this O-line coach, with this offensive, genius and Mike McDaniel. So I wonder if that helps lessen. And I just kind of, again, it's one pot that's got to serve all. And when you say, do I believe in the player? I don't have any question that they believe in Khalil Mack, Odafe, and Thule. I think those are three guys that they believe in, all three. And I would imagine, I think a lot of it with Khalil is probably going to come down to what's the number. Can you help us out here where it's not 18 and maybe it's a little bit more 12, 13 range? Can we do that? Is there a way to make that work, since Owe is probably going to get $80 million and Thule's going to probably get $100 million? Those are the sort of things that we're probably looking at.
Yeah. This is another thing I've been thinking about. I feel like over the first 2 years, because Jesse Minter was so good, they felt like they could really invest offensively, right? The first, 2 rounds in the first 2 drafts, all offense. Does that change a little bit now that you've sort of flipped the scales, as we talked about earlier, where your OC is now, one of the top play callers in the league, and your DC is going to be cutting his teeth a little bit? Does that change how you approach it? And now you feel like you have to maybe invest more defensively to give Chris O'Leary more talent, because your expectation is that the OC is going to be able to do more with less. Over the first 2 years, the DC was doing more with less. But I agree with you 100%. Like, the one thing that I learned about this scheme is you got to have 3 edge rushers,
right,
for it to be elite.
Have to.
Right. And they went into the season with 2 and hoped that Bud would be something and Kyle Kennard would be something. And they realized early on that it wasn't the 3 that they needed. And so they went out and made a big trade for Odafe Owe. I think you have to have 3. Is it the 3 that they had last year? I think in a perfect world, yes. But the clear, thing that I learned was that you have to have 3 in some capacity to get into some of these looks in known passing situations. But the trade-off there is going to be fascinating. Is it a little bit of a shift in terms of putting more of the cap table into the defense and a little bit less on offense, because you feel like the offensive coordinator and Mike McDaniel is going to be able to do more with less?
Yeah, I think we'll know when that pick 22 comes up, man, because there are going to be blue chip D-line players available. It's a deep, and this is not me digging into it yet. It's just talking to our friend DJ and kind of what this draft looks like, and it's a D-line draft. I mean, you have got blue chip interiors, defensive interior linemen, and you've got blue chip edges that are probably going to drop down there, because there's going to be a couple wide receivers, there's going to be a few tackles, there's going to be at least one quarterback, and those guys are going to fall. A couple corners, like we do every year, we start piecing together, all right, who could be available? And I think that'll be, like you said, do they take that? But with only 5 picks, do they trade back? Because we know the premium that teams are willing to pay. We just saw it last year with the Atlanta Falcons and the Rams, in trading a future 1 and a current, 3 or a day 2 pick. So with that presents itself, is it the I don't know. I don't think frugality is the right word, but the idea of, hey, let's build some depth or is it we need this guy right now? We can drop him in and he could get after it.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be fascinating. My assumption is you're gonna see them be a little bit more aggressive defensively in terms of the
Yeah.
talent, because I just feel like you got to put Chris O'Leary in a position to be successful. You feel like he's going to put the players in a position to be successful. You got to put a young DC in a position to be successful. And Jesse Minter got a lot out of guys that other teams did not.
Right.
Tier Tart is probably the best example of that, but you can go down the list. Puna Ford, some of these, even the rookies, right?
Last year, the rookie corners, Dante
Right.
Jackson. I mean,
right. Christian Fulton, another one who,
Yeah.
who played some decent ball for the Chargers, right?
Yeah.
Do you expect that lift immediately? I mean, I think, in theory, over the course of Chris O'Leary's time as DC, he might get to that level, but to expect it immediately, I think would be a bit of a mistake. So you want to set him up with enough talent on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I would assume. I mean, obviously, priority one was Tier Tart. It's already done. And after what happened,
they also gave him.
Year,
They also gave him a market rate deal.
Yeah,
like
here it is.
They could have given Puna Ford. They could have given Puna Ford that same contract at the same time last year, and he would still be a Charger right now. So I think they learned their lesson in that way.
Exactly. I think that was one where, had they known, they would have. They just miscalculated what the market was, and now that they realize, we can't do that again. But to me, that's. And because the edge market is so bananas, I have no idea what Oweh and his representation are thinking, or what that's going to look like. But I would assume they're probably going to try to do the same thing of just, hey, can we do it? Is 80 enough? Is 20 a year the right number for Oweh? And
what if it's like 22? Like that's what that's the number I keep coming back to. Like with Zion, with Oweh, like I feel like with the way they're positioned, the tape they put out last year, you might want to wait a little bit, get through the combine, have some conversations, get a really clear idea of what the market is before pulling the trigger. I think with Tier, right? Like I think they came to him with a really logical deal. I think for Tier, he appreciates the opportunity that the Chargers gave him. He believes in Mike Elston. He knows he's going to be able to play at a high level with the Chargers. With Zion and Oweh, like, when you get into the mix and there's 5 teams and there's a bunch of cap space out there, your numbers might get inflated, and it would be logical and I think a good business decision to wait. So I would be surprised if those guys got deals done with the Chargers, before the combine, before that market really fully crystallized. So they knew, okay, like I'm not giving up any money here if I take a deal back with the Chargers.
Yeah, and I guess the other side of that too is, like I just mentioned, maybe the fact that this is a deep edge draft that does help the Chargers a little bit. That teams are more willing to just say, well, we can just draft a guy here, which is what you do. You draft premium positions that are expensive in the first round, and you overcome what their salaries are going to look like in 4 years. So maybe that benefits them a little bit. Let's get through this here so we can get you on your way, Pops. I'm just going to kind of there's Trey Lance, Keenan, Conklin. I mean, Keenan, I don't know. I love that he was able to kind of put up those numbers and get a couple career records with the Chargers, but I can't see it. I don't quite see how that works when you have Ladd McConkey in that room, and how much better maybe that fits.
Yeah, I think that offensively, when you look at this receiver room, build the offense around Ladd McConkey. Yeah. Like build the offense around Ladd McConkey. And if you're building the offense around Ladd McConkey, he should be the guy that's running the short area option routes 90% of the time.
Right.
When you have Keenan Allen in there, that is the best part of his game. And this is why I talked about some of the redundancy. Doesn't mean that like both players are going to be unproductive, but Keenan Allen is inevitably going to take away some of those looks from Ladd McConkey. And because Ladd McConkey is a better athlete, a lot of these times he's running the intermediate or deep routes, which is not taking advantage of his skill set. I think in a pinch, they needed a veteran receiver to come in and replace Mike Williams after Williams retired ahead of training camp. But now if you have a full off season to sort of piece this thing together, I think there's just way too much crossover in terms of how Keenan wins and how Ladd wins. And if you really want Ladd to be the centerpiece of the offense, I don't think he can be in a receiver room with Keenan Allen. That's how I look at it. And I would assume that that's how they go in that direction.
Yeah, I'm with you. To me, I love that Keenan led the league for a long time for most of the season, and first downs gained on third down. But when it's 3rd and 4 and you're picking up 6, and it could be 3rd and 4 and Ladd's picking up 16, that's kind of
Right.
what you're giving, and I think that's something that needs to be fixed. Kind of, I assume that Kimani, because of the number, he's an exclusive rights free agent. To me, that makes sense. I think I saw enough from him that I'm
Yeah.
comfortable feeling like, hey, if Arande's healthy, and also not to mention kind of what McDaniel's been able to do with running backs and where he's been able to find them and how productive they've been, no matter which stop he's been at. Whether it's you go all the way back to Washington and Alfred Morris, or all the string of backs until they got McCaffrey in San Francisco and Houston, and everywhere he's gone, it doesn't matter who the back is, he's able to make them incredibly productive. So to me, that just makes sense to have an Arande and Kimani running back room, and then figure out who that third guy is.
Omarion.
I'm sorry, Amari, and yes, Arande
Yeah.
though going to be very important.
Yeah.
Arande is going to be very important.
Exclusive rights can't negotiate elsewhere. So Kimani will be back. I think the one thing I think about with the running back room is, I think Omarion will be great in this scheme.
Yeah.
Do they bring in a third guy? Maybe with a little bit of juice, a little bit of speed, fits more in line with what McDaniel had in Miami. But again, like if you head into the season and your top 2 backs are Omarion Hampton and Kimani Vidal,
you're good.
I'm fine with it. And McDaniel has proven like he's going to get the most out of backs. Raheem Mostert had 17 touchdowns in his offense. Like
I mentioned this last week. I said that, by the way, I know that like in terms of, I'm not saying he's the same guy, but just draft profile, combine production, Amarian and Christian McCaffrey are basically the same person. Like Amarion's a little bit taller. They're both he's a little bit heavier, but you look at their 10-yard splits, their shuttles, their 40s, like they're all there. Like so he's done it with that sort of bigger. You see what Kyle does with that type of back. It doesn't have to be this 4-2 or this 4-3 guy. You can do it with someone that's in those mid 4-4s like McCaffrey, like Amari. Now, of course, McCaffrey had the hands. I mean, just the most incredible hands of any running back in the league. But I think Amarion's shown that he can catch the ball out of the backfield. Fortunately, we didn't get to see it nearly enough as much as we would have liked to.
Yeah, I think that's the frustrating part is like he was starting to hit his stride in that Giants game and then got hurt in the next week. Like I'll just say this. He can play in any scheme. He has the potential to be like the best running back in football. Like I genuinely believe that. And so like I have no worries about how he fits. And trust me, he has plenty of speed.
Yes,
he has plenty of
game speed.
Yeah,
like Daniel said, he's like, yeah, it doesn't have to be a 4. He goes, let me see what game speed looks like, and that's what I'm looking for. And I
was hoping that the Chargers fans would be able to see how good Omarion Hampton is, and it just never came together because of that freak injury in the Washington game. But like if he stays healthy, he's gonna rush for 1,400 yards. Yeah. Like that's just what it is. That's the level of player he is.
I don't think there's really anybody else free agent wise that's, huge needle mover. I guess the only one would be just from, selfishly from an attitude standpoint is just bringing Tony Jefferson back, and getting Unk back in that room. And look, for whatever you want to say, like good things happen when he's on the field, man. I don't think you can argue that. He has got a nose for the ball and a way to create turnovers. And to me, that's worth bringing back.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, they need a fourth safety. Because now that we know Chris O'Leary is the DT, Derwin's going to be playing the nickel a bunch. So you have Mickens and Elijah Molden, but you need a fourth guy, for some depth. Bring Tony back, maybe another draft pick, and you're good to go. One thing I would like to get your thoughts on is the tight end room. Conklin's obviously a free agent. Disley is sort of in that mix for a potential cap casualty. I think we saw a lot of things we liked about Arande. He has to improve as a blocker to be, a full-time tight end. So, if you move on from Disley, that could be a position, sort of an underrated position that they might have to target to maybe try and find sort of that all-around Y tight end, so that Gadsden can sort of be used more as that move piece. But that's an interesting position, I think.
Yeah, and I thought, look. We interviewed Tyler. I was excited about Tyler, sure-handed in the red zone. And And we have the Chiefs game in Brazil, and we're like, yeah, here we go, man. This is, and he's doing quarterback sneaks under center, and I don't know what happened. Like it just like all of a sudden it's just gone. So to me, because Tucker's a restricted free agent, I think you've got your sort of blocking tight end there, right? If you need to anchor somebody in the outside, he certainly is not a natural fit. I kind of think about the fullback position and how, Kyle Juszczyk and Alec Ingold look compared to how Scott Matlock looks. Like that's not really a match. So I don't know if you call Gabe Neighbors and see what he's up to these days. There or what, but
Xander Horvath,
are those guys back in the mix? Who was our fullback from Iowa State that we all wanted to make the team last year?
Steve-O Klotz.
Steve-O Klotz, what's he up to these days?
He just got drafted into the UFL. Actually,
there you go.
I this is how crazy I am. I looked into where he was because somebody mentioned to me on a podcast on a live stream, like talking about fullback. Like, what about Steve-O Klotz? I'm like, that's actually not a bad idea. Because I'll tell you this. Jim Harbaugh loves him some Steve-O Klotz.
He did.
All right?
And from a physical profile, it fits the fullback that Mike McDaniel uses. So yeah, I think you're right. The tight end room is something that will have to be. I don't quite see this. And again, the tight end room was so weird this year, man. Like it was just weird. How Disley goes from being one of the most important players on the offense last year to being a DNP, or an inactive, I should say, on game day for no reason. Like it was very odd. It was a very odd position group, the way that it was addressed on game day.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem is when you want to play this bully ball power running game offense, you go after these power bully ball tight ends. And the problem is those guys aren't typically great athletes by NFL standards. And so now you're trying to piece together your special teams units, and you don't have elite athletes in a room elsewhere in the NFL that typically has really, really good athletes. And I think that's why you saw some weird stuff with the inactives is you're just trying to find guys that you can plug in. Because typically, you're talking about 250, 260, 6'5". That's like a prototypical tight end body that can move. That's typically a really good position to dig into, similar with edge on defense to fill out your special teams. And they didn't really have anybody in that tight end room that could be a plus player on special teams. And that's why you saw, Tyler Conklin and Will Dissly on special teams. And there were some rough moments. You saw Scott Matlock. So I think I think they should invest there. I'd love to see, a really just a all around fine tight end, somebody that can do a little bit of everything, doesn't necessarily have like a plus trait, but a guy that can really fill that Y role. So then Arande can be that move piece. I think that would make a lot of sense in that room.
Yeah, I guess we just kind of look at the Bears roster. I feel like they've got about 6 at any given moment. Maybe you can just pluck one of those guys off that roster and just drop them over here. I don't know anything outside of Sadiq. Nothing about the draft class of tight ends, but I didn't really know much about Arande Gadsden last year, and did not have that on my bingo card of who the tight end might be out of all those tight ends that we were talking about. I mean, it felt like there were 50 of them, and not once did I ever mention the name Arande Gadsden, but I think I've probably brought up another 15 others. So who knows what, and kudos to the front office for identifying him, because I do think he's got a bright future for certain. I mean, he is, I know that there were a couple drops, and obviously it didn't end well. The Texans game was not great, but at the same time, there's enough there and enough incredible catches and the athleticism that I think he's going to end up.
I have no concerns about him as a pass catcher. I think in order for him to have like a really big role in an NFL offense, he's got to improve as a blocker. Yeah. What do you think about corner?
It's a good one, because I do feel like, again, it's a pretty good, talking to DJ, it's a pretty good corner group, and there could be a pretty darn good corner sitting there. I think the one thing that we've been spoiled by is that Steve Klingscale, Jesse Minter, coaching up 5th rounders like Cam and Tarheeb and Dante when he was brought in. I've got a couple buddies that are Steelers fans. They're like, oh, good, you can have him. Same thing with Benjamin St. Juste. He might be the worst corner in the league. And it's like, this guy's, Ben was pretty good, especially from what they asked of him. He was pretty freaking good, and Dante was sensational. Yeah. So that's kind of where I don't know if Dean Leonard gets an opportunity. If you just, I don't know what I haven't even looked into the market, the corner market, and who might be out there and what that cost is.
Yeah,
But to
to
me,
me, I'm like, you really like. I feel like they could use like a premier corner. Like
yes,
I would like look at pick 22,
right,
and be like, hmm, you know,
yeah, and that's
just so
what, like
we're
I
talking
said,
about giving O'Leary more talent, you know.
right. They especially if they're going to spend their money on the front, which they already did with Tierra, and if you're going to spend it on Owe and Khalil and Thule, then yeah, let's get Here are some. Who was the one that I can't find him here that DJ was talking about? But there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 first round grades on corners from
Oh wow,
PFF.
okay.
So Jermon McCoy is the guy that everybody's pointing to out of Tennessee. Mansour Delane out of LSU, Avion Terrell, Brandon Cease. Like all again, I have not looked at them one bit, but just kind of leaning on DJ said it's a pretty good corner group this year. So yeah, that's certainly that would be something if they drafted a corner in the first round. It is not something that in the 10 years I've been doing this, Asante in the second was the closest
Jason
that
Verrett was probably the last first round corner they
that was
took.
absolutely was the last one. Oh man, there's somebody else that was even. I think it might have been before that is escaping me, a second rounder that did not pan out. But anyway, yeah, it's Verrett's the last one. And look, he would have been he was an exceptional corner. He just couldn't stay healthy.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think Cam Hart has a lot of attributes that you love, but I do think there's also some issues there. Love Tarheeb, but at the same time, I think it's very, I think, like you said, if you could find a premier corner to put into that rotation, yes, that would go a long way.
Yeah, yeah. I just think like you look at different position groups on defense and you say, okay, like, adding a premier player, blue chip player to this group, how much easier does that make the job for Chris O'Leary as he kind of figures it out in year one? Whereas before it was like, they don't have a blue chip player here, but they'll get more out of them. Like you felt like that was kind of like something you could rely on year over year, because Jesse Minter was so good and the staff was so good.
Yeah. And I don't, and again, corners, top shelf corners rarely make it to free agency. You're trading for those guys. I mean, guys that are really, really good. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Linebacker,
I like the linebacker group.
Same here. I mean, Delshon Phillips played great those last few weeks too, man. Not to mention our man Marlo Wax, week 18 against Denver.
That's the big one for me. Like,
let's get more reps.
And you got Junior, Like,
Junior, who knows what Colson's going to be?
Right. He's been, an afterthought because of injuries, but like third round pick, like, and you and I mean, I'm still high on him. I'm keeping the faith. Man. I'm keeping the faith, and I don't know if that's like, I don't know if that's like my bias in play.
No, it's definitely my bias in play. I can guarantee you that. So
we're the believers, though. We still believe. We still
believe. You know what? It's Agent Mulder for me. I want to believe. That's what it is. I just I want to believe. Come on, man. All right, Pop. We appreciate it. Subscribe to The Athletic. It's worth it for Pop's coverage of the Chargers alone. Make sure you follow him on Substack with Pop. Still going through the off season, I assume. Hops with Pop.
Oh yeah, we're rolling.
Right?
I'm doing our The Athletic's top 150 free agent rankings this year. So
nice.
Past couple of weeks, just been grinding tape. Trying to watch like 200.
I mean, I'm over here just pooping out my mouth. Or what do you know what corners are out there? Are there any good corners?
I haven't gotten to corners yet. Yeah, I'm almost through offense right now. Got to finish tight ends today, and then I'm gonna get into the linemen. But watch the running backs, a good group of free agent running backs. ETN, Kenneth Walker, even some guys that might be a little bit cheaper that can make some sense as a third piece in that room. And then receiver, there's some interesting young guys. That might not be on people's radar, like Jalen Naylor from the Vikings.
Right.
Really, really interesting piece. And one guy I would keep an eye on that would make a lot of sense in McDaniel's offense is Calvin Austin from Pittsburgh.
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like in a more creative offense, he could be a really interesting piece, especially when you're talking about, okay, like you like the
leading receiver this year, right?
He might have been. He had like 500 yards, something like that.
Yeah.
But they were using him in a very static offense with Aaron Rodgers.
Right.
I feel like he's got real speed and real juice.
Yeah.
So if you're talking about like, okay, you like the group of receivers, maybe add a at a speed player, gadget type player that would make sense. That's a guy that I like a lot.
Yeah.
But yeah, working through that.
And a returner. That's
You're out on
probably
Dede?
well. I just think if Dede was healthy, then yeah, I think you probably got to be right. If he wasn't healthy, then you got to figure out whether or not, because what game was it, man? I can't remember what game it was when he couldn't run away from the tight end, and I was like, okay, that's not
On a
the
return?
Darius. Yeah, on that
Some of the
punt
one where he
return,
reversed fields and
he reversed field and he got
Vegas.
tracked down. Because that was the Raider game, and I was like, okay, either something's wrong or it's gone. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like I'd
No,
never.
I don't think he was healthy. He had that knee thing earlier in the year, and I don't think he ever really bounced back from that. I got faith in Dede. He showed me enough.
Yeah, it was a bad year though. It
Oh
was
yeah, 100%.
a really, really bad year for him. And
100%.
so I kind of would hopefully he'll be fine. Just he's a great dude. Would love to obviously see it continue for the fourth year. And then there's Quentin Johnston, and trying to figure out how that fits into a Mike McDaniel offense.
I like it. I think he's gonna be good. I think he's gonna be good. Get the ball in his hands in the short area of the field. How about that? That might be a positive for Quentin Johnson.
Yeah, not a bad
idea.
Instead
of trying to make him into an X.
Yeah.
Stop trying to make Quentin an X.
It's too tempting. He's too big. He's got those long levers. All right, Pop. We appreciate it. We'll be back again next week. Again, thank you to our friends at FanDuel for putting it on. Be sure to check out The Athletic and Hops with Pop. Bolt up, everybody.